Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. She's Marjorie Egan. I am Jim Browdy. We're live at the library, streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News. Tomorrow morning at 11, Senator Elizabeth Warren will join us in Brighton. Yesterday on the show, we asked Boston Mayor Michelle Wu about ShotSpotter, a technology used by Boston police since I think it was 2007 to attempt to detect audio of gunshots and send a rapid police response. Mayor Wu supports the technology. Here's what she had to say.
This year we issued the first ever report in compliance with that ordinance that documents all the data privacy parameters, who can access this, knowing where these are. And so it's a balance, but we want to put public safety first, using the best technology while ensuring that everyone's on the same page about how to protect it.
Yesterday, also, the head of the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts, Carol Rose, was here. They put out a report saying that technology is unreliable and discriminatory, calling on the city to drop it. Here's Carol Rose with us yesterday.
So there's a lot of opportunity for human failure, human frailties. So they get the report, a human looks at it, and then they send out the police. And of course, if you've put all of these ShotSpotter technologies into communities of color, that's going to lead to over-policing in communities.
Joining us now, one in person, one on Zoom, to make their case on the effectiveness of ShotSpotter is the CEO of ShotSpotter's parent company. It's called SoundThinking, Ralph Clark. Ralph, wherever you are, it's good to have you. Thanks so much for joining us. And Bill Bratton is the executive chair of Teneo Risk. He's on the board of SoundThinking. And you may recall he ran the police departments in New York City and Los Angeles and right here in Boston. Bill, it's great to have you. And it's great to have you, Ralph, too. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, great. There's Ralph. I wasn't sure if you were there.
Hello,
there
Ralph.
You are. Thank you very much for joining us, Ralph. So explain to people who don't know what ShotSpotter is.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So ShotSpotter is an acoustic gunshot detection system that uses sensors to be able to detect, locate, and alert on instances of gunfire. And the reason this technology is so critical, and most people don't know this, is that 80 to 90% of the time a gun is fired criminally, it doesn't generate a call to 911 by the traditional 911 technology or service. And so, of course, this leaves communities at significant risk, because what you want to be able to do is have police and first responders be able to respond to incidents of criminal gunfire quickly and precisely in order to potentially attend to gunshot wound victims, recover physical forensic evidence, but most importantly, show communities that their safety is prioritized by the police department, and they're mobilizing a response to those very dangerous incidents.
You know, Bill, one of the things that's been tough for us when we've tried to dive into this and understand it better is the fact patterns, for lack of a better expression, of the both sides of the argument are so far apart. Civil Liberties Union's contention, based upon looking at data from the Boston Police Department, is there were 70% false positives. Yet the company itself says that it's 97% accurate. How do you explain this colossal divide?
Well, let's look at the language, false positive. What they're using to describe incidents where ShotSpotter detects that a gun has been fired, but by the time the police arrive, that very often, the majority of the time, the perpetrator has left, there is no shell casing, there is no victim, fortunately. They described that as a false positive. Not a false positive. There was a gunshot, many shots fired, as Ralph's already talked about, 80 to 90% of the time in Boston and around the country. People do not call 911 when they hear gunshots.
Yeah, but let me stay on the first point you made. If there's no objective evidence of it beyond the ShotSpotter, meaning there's no cartridge left or whatever, how do you know that you're right and it was a gunshot and that the Civil Liberties Union is wrong and that there wasn't one?
Because of the quality of the technology. ACLU has been invited to come in and examine the technology. They have not done it. But in terms of being quite frank with you, they don't know what the hell they're talking about because they have never looked.
What do you mean invited in and not done it? What does that mean?
Ralph, can you explain? You were involved in the invitation.
How about it, Ralph?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we invited the ACLU because they had some concerns. We said, hey, look, if you want to come in under a non-disclosure agreement, we'll open up the kimono, so to speak, and allow you to inspect the source code for the technology. But just on the point that you raised about their use of a false positive is a bit of a mischaracterization, because in fact, although there might not be physical forensic evidence of a shot being fired, there is plenty of digital forensic evidence that a shot.
What does that mean, Ralph?
Because yeah.
I'm going to explain what that means. So part of the system is, I think this idea that we're just sending out blind alerts with no data to support it is a significant mischaracterization, because what we're also doing when we send the alert up, we're sending a recorded snippet of what those sensors were able to detect and record. So the actual responding officer and their 911 center can actually listen to these events in real time. So it's almost as though they were a virtual witness to gunfire. So it's no different than if they were driving around Boston with their windows rolled down during the summer and they hear gunshots, right? And they go to the scene where they think the gunshots are, but they don't find anything. And because they don't find anything doesn't mean that they didn't hear gunshots or that a gun wasn't fired. We're preserving that digital evidence, and it's being presented to them as a part of the alert.
By the way, I should say, in the spirit of full disclosure, I live in a city, Cambridge, which is generally very concerned about civil liberties, that recently determined that they would continue using ShotSpotter. Having said that, I want to get back to your invitation that Bill Bratton mentioned, and Ralph, you talked about a minute ago. Why would the Civil Liberties Union accept your invitation if they'd be under a non-disclosure agreement? How does that advance the cause of truth and full disclosure if they can't talk about what they saw?
Yeah, so we had a very similar arrangement, I think, with the New York University School of Law, that actually we invited them to come in and do a privacy audit of the technology. What we're trying to protect is we don't want them to make a copy of the source code and make it generally available to the public, because we have a company that we're running. We spent tens of millions of dollars over the years developing this technology. The idea would be that they could come in and do some diagnostics and see that what we say and how we describe the system working is in fact how it works. And that we are, for example, we don't have a live audio feed from our sensors out into these neighborhoods, which isn't the case. The sensors are designed to ignore ambient noise and only trigger and timestamp impulsive noise. And when 3 or more of those sensors are able to do that, it's how we're able to pinpoint the exact location of the gunfire. It was just a very curious response, because on one hand, they're being critical and saying, hey, the company's not being transparent. And then we say, come on in and take a look at it. And they said, and the reason for it wasn't that they had to sign, excuse me, an NDA. The reason was, and it's public, you can go to their website, Jay Stanley actually referred to this. He says, we don't have the resources to be able to do that.
We're talking, that's the voice of Ralph Clark, who is the CEO of ShotSpotter's parent company, SoundThinking, and Bill Bratton, who's basically run every police department in America.
Well, the other issue, of course, is that many critics have said that this is targeting communities of color and that there's an over-policing issue there, too. But before we get to that, why aren't people calling 911? Either of you can answer this. Is this because they don't know if it's fireworks or gunshots, or because they're nervous? Or?
Great question. Ralph will describe the 4 R's, but let me speak to that term, targeting. Targeting has a connotation that you're targeting. It's like using a shooting analogy. We're not targeting. The selection of where these devices are located is made by the police department of that city or community. And you referenced Cambridge. There's 13 other cities in Massachusetts whose police chiefs and mayors have supported ShotSpotter in their cities. And even though Senator Warren, who you'll have here tomorrow, you might want to question her about it, see how much she actually knows about this system that is.
What, are you going to produce our show, Bill? Is that what you're doing?
Actually, no. Basically, let's see how much she actually knows about something she's criticizing.
By the way, Senator Warren, Senator Markey, and Congresswoman Presley sent a letter to DHS Homeland Security questioning this whole ShotSpotter thing.
A civil rights issue, they think they
We have refuted and rebutted every aspect of that.
Got it, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
But Ralph can explain why people don't call, or why we believe they may not call, because this is consistent across the United States in the 170 cities where we have ShotSpotter. 70, 80, up to 90% of the time, people do not call 911 when we detect these gunshots.
Ralph? How about it, Ralph? Why?
Yeah, well, and I'll say that this has been independently verified by independent research, this 70 to 90% figure. So we describe the reasons for that kind of resulting into kind of 4 R's. And so the first one, as I think was mentioned earlier, is the notion of recognition. Was that a gunshot or not? Where did it come from? I'm not sure, so I'm reluctant to call. because I'm not sure that I recognize the thing I heard as being a gunshot or not. The other one is retribution, which is very real. I think many of us are familiar with the anti-snitching culture and people not wanting to involve themselves and potentially put themselves at risk if a police officer comes to their door and they're acknowledged as being the person that kind of quote unquote ratted out the shooter or the shooting event. The other one is redundancy. And this is a natural phenomenon we see where people say, hey, you know what? I live in a neighborhood. I think I heard gunshots, but I'm sure my neighbors heard as well. Someone else is going to call. And then the last one, which is the most disheartening and heartbreaking one for me, is the notion of resignation. And I just give up. It's like, this is the way it's supposed to be. I can't see myself, working ourselves out of this particular situation. I'm just resigned to the fact that I live in a neighborhood that has ongoing persistent gun violence. And the culmination of these 4 R's really result in, 80 to 90% of gunfire not getting reported in via 911. And I'll further point out, when the calls are made, right, that 10 to 20% the calls are made, they're typically made 3 to 5 minutes after the shooting event. And oftentimes, because the individual doesn't know exactly where the shots are coming from, they're calling on average like 600 feet away. They're saying, hey, I think the shots happened out here in this particular area, which introduces all manner of biases. And I would encourage anyone, if they have the opportunity, to do a ride along with police in your community and ask them what's involved when they respond to a 911 call for shots fired, the 10 to 20% of the chance, the 10 to 20% of the time they're actually getting a call by 911 versus ShotSpotter. And what I've found, I've done dozens of ride-alongs, is it takes almost 15 to 20 minutes to close a 911 shots fired call. And that's just because people don't know where to go. They're literally driving around a block. And so if you talk about the notion of over-police and the idea of sending police on wild goose chases for, hey, I think I heard shots fired out there, is a much bigger issue than being able to precisely direct first responders and police to the exact location where a shot's been fired with a recording snippet of the event, which represents digital evidence.
Ralph,
that's court accepted, by the way.
If I may, Bill mentioned a minute ago, Bill Bratton said a minute ago, there are 170 communities across the country that have this, and there are about a dozen that have dropped it. One of them being a place that has a real crime and gun violence problem, Chicago. And part of what I read in the story about why Chicago dropped it does deal with the over-policing, at least according to them, of communities of color, low-income communities. What do you say to the Chicagos of the world that made a determination that essentially this is not right for their city, despite tons of gun violence there?
So I think it's a significant misnomer to say that Chicago, quote unquote, has rejected ShotSpotter. What we have in Chicago is a mayor, Brandon Johnson, that has taken the position that he is going to not continue with ShotSpotter, right, while extending it through the summer and through the DNC, which is a really interesting way of, quote unquote, canceling the service. If you look across the board and go anywhere, you go to the city council, where the majority of the city council doesn't support that position. In fact, they're taking the opposite position, and in an unprecedented move, they're going to try to take control of that decision away from the chief executive or the mayor and put it in the hands of the city council, because they feel that strongly that the communities they're representing and serving really need this technology. The superintendent of police also, as much as he can, obviously he works for the mayor who's taken a different position, and he's definitely said, and because he's a man of character, says, hey, look, I support any technology that helps my police respond to gun violence incidents where I know lives have been saved. But at the end of the day, this is a decision that has to be made by my boss. So he's on record as supporting it. We've also done a poll of the residents, and I want to finish this off.
Sure,
the communities and the residents within these communities overwhelmingly support the use of this technology because they know it saved lives. So what we have is the residents, the city council, the superintendent of police versus the mayor, and a small group of vocal folks, many of whom don't even live in the neighborhoods where this technology is.
Yeah, but the guy,
being
in all
deployed.
fairness, the guy ran for mayor saying what his position was on the technology, and he was elected. It's not like he's some, alien who just dropped himself into City Hall. But respectfully, can I get back to something Ralph said a minute ago, Bill, as somebody who's led police departments for most of your adult life. Is any technology, in your estimation, that will reduce crime regardless of what the concerns are about it. Is any technology good technology in your mind?
Not any, but many. That look at all the technologies that police are now starting to use. Drones. So, for example, New York City is equipping 5 of their precinct stations with drones so that when a shot spotter gun alert goes off, they will send police cars, but they will also launch the drone. So the drone will get there much faster than the police car, and the drone will be able to visually provide very quick information to the responding officers. In New York, interestingly enough, some of the city council are resistant to the idea of drone technology.
How about facial recognition? Where, if I may, there's no question that in some circumstances it has addressed an individual crime or criminal, but there's also overwhelming evidence, as you know, that it's racially biased. So is that worth it? Is it worth the latter? Is the former justify or not justify, make the latter acceptable?
Facial recognition is not overwhelming evidence. There's evidence that on occasion, that particularly in terms of minority faces, that it is not as accurate in terms of dealing with non-minority faces. But just think of this. Every day, 3 million Americans go through airports with facial recognition technology every day. It is here, and it's going to be expanding. And the challenge is to make sure that it is the first step in an identification process.
You can opt out of that at TSA. I'm sure you know that.
Yeah,
because I opted out a couple of weeks ago.
So you go through all the pat-downs, et cetera. So good luck to you.
No,
seriously.
Well, but I made that choice. A lot of people don't have a choice when they're walking down the street and there's a camera everywhere.
Most of your office buildings and years ahead, if you're employing that building, you may have the opportunity to opt out, but they're going to put you through additional screening to get into your office building.
Ralph, were you about to say something?
I tell you what, and I don't want us to conflate facial recognition with acoustic gunshot detection.
No. I'm talking about technology beyond just shot spotter. But go ahead.
Yeah. So on the point of technology and shot spotter specifically, we have to be very clear. Shot spotter doesn't know the who or the why of gunfire. It only knows the what, the when, and the where. That's all we know, and race has nothing to do with it. We don't know the identity of the perpetrator nor the victim. We're only detecting and locating criminal gunfire.
Ralph, tell us a story or two. There must have been instances where you think ShotSpotter worked very well and saved lives. Give us a story or two.
Yeah, I'll give you a very personal story. A friend of mine's life was actually saved by a ShotSpotter alert. He was involved in an armed robbery, and there was a shootout in a gas station in the middle of the day. It's a gas station that I've been to probably 40, 50 times in Oakland, California. There were plenty of witnesses that were there. He actually ended up having been shot seven or 8 times. It was bleeding out and was begging people to call 911. And what do you think people were doing first?
Taking care of themselves.
They were filming it. They were filming him.
God.
It's all on camera.
They were filming him.
That's pretty horrible.
It was on camera. Now, ultimately, someone did call 911, but the point is, by the time the first 911 call came in, there was a response to that specific location. They'd already scooped my friend up and took him in the patrol car and got him to Highland Hospital. Thank God. One of the things that Oakland has going for it is world-class trauma. If you ever get shot, it's not a bad place to get shot in Oakland, California, because the trauma care intervention capability of Highland Hospital is world-class, and they were able to save his life. If he had gotten there another 3 to 5 minutes later, he would have been transported by a 911 call, he would have bled out. He would have died. And so that's a real situation. This scenario plays out literally hundreds of times a day across the United States. We're getting first responders to gunshot wound victims that otherwise would bleed out. And with the proper training and resources of first responders, i.e. police, having trauma care kits and being trained to apply tourniquets and blood clotting mechanisms, they're able to stabilize and intervene in that gunshot wound victims and stop the bleeding and save a life. And that's incredibly powerful. And that's exactly what you want. Unfortunately, with this endemic problem we have around gun violence. That, by the way, disproportionately affects young men of color. And that's why I'm so passionate about this work, is that we're making a difference in saving lives.
Ralph Clark, Bill Bratton, we really appreciate your perspective, and thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. We've been speaking with Ralph Clark of ShotSpotter's parent company, SoundThinking, and Bill Bratton, Executive Chairman of Teneo Risk? Teneo Risk, okay, I didn't want to screw that up.
By the way, guys, I love your studio. This is great.
Isn't it great? Isn't it gorgeous? I know,
we
we're
do
very
too.
lucky.
Thank you, Bill.
Bill Bratton, of course, is former police commissioner of New York City and Boston, former chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. Coming up after a quick break, quite the transition here. This is our Am I the A-Hole segment, the bedtime edition. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News.
Funding for our programs comes from you.
And Gloucester Stage, presenting Wish You Were Here by Pulitzer Prize winner Sanaz Tusi. Girlfriends gather to plan weddings, trade dirty jokes, and weather Iran's revolution. Starts August 9th. GloucesterStage.com. And The Adventure Park at Heritage Museums and Gardens. Zip line and climbing trails for all ages. 7 days a week this summer, rain or shine. More at myadventurepark.com.